I know this can be another topic in itself, but like when I said that, I think it makes more sense for Cain to go to a, he was cast out of the Edenic land, and he took a wife in this new land, and then immediately a couple girls were like, oh, he took his wife was his sister, trying to account for like, no, like they, of course, they believed that only Adam, Eve, and Cain, I guess, were the only ones alive at that time. So Cain took his sister, and that's how it worked. Like, just immediately, that's exactly how they were told, how they were
Yep.
brought up, and not to think otherwise. And I'm like, and I didn't point it out to them, but like I would be like, do you recognize how quickly you jumped to that? You didn't even think about it, did you? You didn't even think about the concept of other mankind, other races being around at that time, and we're just talking about the Edenic land in this story. And that even, it just points to more significance of this Edenic land that they, of course, probably don't even recognize.
Yeah. Oh, I know, dude. We've been raised with tradition, And the one I hate the most, thinking about it this week, the one I hate the most is we're raised to think that when God created, it was a perfect, immortal, sinless thing, and it must have been that way because it was a good God making it. But that's just that's just our logic.
Yeah.
There's no there's no reason to think that. There's no verse that says that. The young earth creationists will go to Genesis 1 and say, well, when God creates something, then it declares, it says, and God said it was good. It's like, yeah, but that doesn't mean it's perfect and sinless and immortal. I mean, for all we know, that just means he's rectifying it out of a state of chaos to a state of good. I mean, there's different ways you can look at this, but we've been trained up to bring certain assumptions to it, and it's caused absolute scientific nightmares for us.
Yeah.
And
That was
that's the truth.
that was another thing I talked to him. Was like, look, I understand your thoughts on evolution, and I would have to agree. I also understand that science cannot be completely reliable, but there's a lot of it, especially natural history, that like, first off, we can trust, and second off, I could just kind of tell that like they could care less about science. They just, or maybe not, that's not the right way to put it, but they had such a low view of science that now they just sound crazy. And honestly, any if they're trying to witness to somebody and they start talking creation evolution and they share like, well, science has a lot of issues, immediately I could see some atheist or unbeliever just be like, what, like, what are you talking about, or like how
Yeah.
dare you, almost.
Yeah, people generally don't have such a low view of science. I don't know anyone that has a low view of science except young earth creationists. Uh, you know,
Hmm. I even like I actually bought this book that studies like or talks about when certain scientific discoveries were made. And
mm,
there's actually one here. Let me grab it super quick.
do they mention Giordano Bruno?
I don't think they do. No, I think it just talks about some of like the major scientific discoveries. There is this one person here. Let me grab it super quick.
Galileo.
Yeah, it does talk about Galileo. There's this one little blip that was in the book that I thought was kind of interesting real early on. Let me see if I can find it here. Um, um, talks about this one guy that had a really interesting. Maybe this is it. Oh, this guy by the name of Xenophanes, philosopher
Hmm.
poet Xenophanes from the 5th century. He apparently lived in ripe old age for the time. Let's see. He was the first person known to have formulated a theory of the Earth history based on the discovery of fossils. The fossilized remains of marine creatures found inland, far from the sea, inspired him to suggest there had been alternating periods of worldwide flood and drought.
Huh.
I thought that was kind of interesting. It's like he suggested that you had this. I don't know if he didn't suggest these creations, but he had these periods of worldwide flood then drought. God, I don't know. Maybe I just kind of read a little bit of God
Yeah.
using flood to destroy something, and then you had no flood. I don't know. That's kind of. I read that and I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. I was reading somewhere Hippolytus of Rome in his fragments or something. He mentions he met a guy that showed him a fossil and said that this thing must have been many thousands of years old or something. Hippolytus was like, "Nah, I disagree." But it was something like that, and I remember reading it and being like, "Well, that's interesting though that this guy tried to use a fossil to argue that way."